Welcome, everybody. I won't try any more Hebrew except for that. Glad that we're all here for another Cyber Week. Obviously, it's not the usual grand global event, given some of the challenges, but tech policy obviously continues to create challenges and important issues, and I'm glad that the organizers and all are here to continue to move the ball forward and try to have as normal a life as we can. I'm pleased that the Future Privacy Forum was able to bring over a delegation. Usually we have a huge collection of data regulators and chief privacy officers from around the world. It wasn't a surprise that a good number of those folks were not easily able or willing or capable of traveling at this time, but a special thank you to some of the group that did make it over and really wanted to show support and continue to have as much normalcy and deal with the chaos, but the chaos of tech policy, which is continuing to develop around the world, and we have to continue being part of those conversations. So I'm delighted that we have some of the FPF Israel team here with us. Rivki Dvash. Rivki will lead a panel after the break about some of the challenges of data protection in this particular challenging time. And I'm glad that one of our advisory board members, Professor Ken Bamberger of Berkeley, I see here as well, and Lee Freund, the executive director of the Network Advertising Initiative, and Gary Keibel, one of the leading ad tech lawyers in the US, and Jason Serfati of Unicast, company doing some very sophisticated things, both in location data and the privacy of location data. All were able to join and make the travel. Okay, so our panel today, as I mentioned, second, we will talk about a lot of the challenging local issues. Here we'll talk both local and global in the world of AI regulation. Chen Bartash-Levanon, to my left, Senior Legal Counsel and Team Lead and DPO at the INCD. For those who are not local to Israel, the cyber authority connected to the Prime Minister's office plays a leading role. I'll let Chen tell a little bit more about that, and in particular the role they're playing both in regulatory and guidance activities around the threats and challenges of AI. Amit Ashkenazi, probably all of you well recognize, not only from his previous role leading the legal department at the INCD. Back when I first met him, I think he was even still at the Privacy Protection Authority, and Amit has played a lead role in a whole range of AI and data protection and other policy regulation issues in Israel, and so look forward to an update from him. Nir Gerson is the Deputy Legal Advisor at the Israel Privacy Protection Authority. One of the topics that I hope we'll talk a little bit about is who is the lead AI regulator? Is it the Data Protection Authority? In some countries it is, in some countries it won't be. How will they play together or not? Many of you who followed the EU AI Act closely saw all of the clauses that said, but of course, with consideration of the GDPR, what exactly does that mean? We see already the tensions among EU regulators. Some are the privacy regulator, so the tension will be internal, and I guess they'll have to agree with themselves. But others are not, and some see this as a very big threat, especially since some of those other regulators are not independent data protection regulators in the same way that the Data Protection Authority is created. And one of the challenges I think we will all see is the battle between these regulators in Europe and elsewhere with the different perspectives that they bring to the table. So Nir perhaps will share with us how the Israel Privacy Protection Authority is thinking about how it can use its current authority or maybe future authorities to help make a difference in shaping good AI practice. And finally, Noah Srebrenik. Noah, correct me if I didn't do it properly, co-founder and CEO of CitrusX. We'll talk about some of her experience. There are folks who've been working on, they didn't call it AI regulation, they called it risk and the integrity of financial lending. And there are regulated institutions that have had to deal with many, maybe not extinction, but stability of the financial markets, the discrimination, and so on and so forth. And so what might we learn from the lines of defense and the regulatory activities and the risk work that some of the financial institutions and banks and others have been dealing with for many years, and how are they dealing with the current new waves of regulation? Okay, we'll have each of our presenters talk. I'll have a quick, perhaps, question for them, and then we'll open up for questions at the end so that we can really deal with the range of issues. Chen, I hand off to you.
Thank you. So as we sit here today, I think it has become clear that AI has the potential to transform the way organizations work, whether it's accelerating product development, enhancing client experience, helping employees be more efficient, and even improving public services. Having said that, with great power comes great responsibility, and it is essential that we develop and deploy AI technology in a responsible way, part of which is maintaining reliable and safe systems that are built with consideration of privacy and security concerns. The INCD has recently published a report that summarizes the most common threats that are related to AI systems, as well as suggestions for mitigation for these threats. For example, one of the main threats that we are seeing now is data poisoning, which involves manipulating the model's training data so that the model learns incorrect patterns and then misclassifies data and can produce inaccurate, biased, or malicious outputs. Another threat that we're seeing is prompt injection, which is an attack that attempts to insert malicious instructions or hidden commands into an AI system. And in this way, the attacker tries to hijack the output or to jailbreak the system, which then will allow them to evade content filters and other safeguards that may be embedded into the systems. And of course, another challenge that we are all discussing all the time is the challenge of compliance with data protection laws and regulations. Since when we talk about compliance, we talk about collection and storage and processing of data by AI tools, which includes obtaining proper consent and, of course, transparency and explainability. These issues can be often quite challenging when dealing with AI systems. So what can we do to tackle all this? So as we often say, we need to start with a thorough risk assessment. Whether you're developing new technology or you're integrating technology of third parties into your systems, it's of course very important to evaluate potential vulnerabilities and proper security measures. Especially, it's important to be minded to data handling practices, since AI tools often rely on very large volumes of data. Ensuring the security of this data is crucial, whether it's personal data or any other information that is included. So it's important to assess the storage methods and transmission protocols to ensure that they are encrypted and protected from unauthorized access. We need to implement strong access controls to the development environment and to the training data, and use strong authentication mechanisms. If you are using technology that is developed by third party, then of course, as you do with other technology, it's important to assess the security practices of your vendors, whether it's infrastructure, security, software development practices, and incident response capabilities. Also, when relying on third-party tools, I would suggest organizations to ask for transparency. It's important to understand how the tools that you are incorporating into your organization function. So ask for explanations or justification, if you can, for the way the tools make their decisions and action. This will allow you to do an independent assessment of reliability, security, and compliance with legal and ethical requirements. Also, make sure that you are clear on data usage and ownership issues, including data storage, processing, and any data sharing arrangements. As to this last point, I would also suggest to consider using product versions that restrict the use of the organization's data for training the foundation model. All of this will allow you to protect your information better, as I said, whether it's PII or or other information that you don't want the vendors to use. And finally, remember that it's not all about technology. So make sure to implement clear internal policies to address do's and don'ts inside your organization. It's important to provide training and awareness programs to employees so that you can educate your employees about potential benefits and risks associated with these systems in order to promote responsible AI use from within the organization.
And a big debate or discussion in the kind of privacy officer or the regulatory world is, who is planning these risk assessments? Is it something new and different and you need AI compliance, AI regulatory leads? Or is this really the kind of work that a good data protection impact assessment always previously did, and it needs to be expanded a little? And there's almost two parallel tracks that seem to be approaching. The data protection people all worrying about very specifically, privacy type issues. But all of a sudden there's new assessments with new laws saying, here's this AI assessment. And it looks, some of it looks the same, some of it looks different. So I heard sounded like the kind of guidance you would be giving anybody using third-party code and data and so forth. Did you find that in the guidance that you did, you had to pull in some new issues that weren't there before, do an assessment to make sure there's no extinction of the world possible, or copyright issues, or how much of this is the same rules for any sophisticated cloud system, software, and so forth, and how much, we need some new language, new expertise, new players doing these types of assessments?
So I think that, of course, companies can benefit from the same security measures that they implement on other systems and the same processes to assess their supply chain. But since the AI technology has specific risks that are associated to it, whether it's purely technological risks, like the one I mentioned, whether it's more of compliance with privacy, whether it's IP considerations, the scope is definitely broader. So it's not just impact on personal data. If we're talking about integrity, we're talking about having systems that you can rely on. You can rely on their functionality. You can rely on the outputs that they give you. So I agree that some of the processes are more natural to professionals in the data privacy industry, but it's definitely broader. And I think that if we only look at it from the data privacy perspective, we can miss on some things. So it's important to have professionals that look at it from different angles also.
Thank you, Chen. Amit, you spent some time helping put together a report that the government used to help shape some of the privacy, the AI strategy specifically in Israel. Help us understand, as someone who's worked deeply both in privacy and now has been working for a few years very specifically in AI, how do these worlds fit together?
So I think that Israel is developing both the substance of its AI policies, but no less it is focusing a lot on the institutional elements, deploying these strategies in a soft regulatory approach. So basically, I call this the journey from Paris to Strasbourg, because the starting point from the external policy point of view is the OECD recommendation 2019, which was the framework that Israel is part of as an OECD country. I had the unique privilege, thanks to Cedric, which I'll mention again in a second, to represent Israel there. And Strasbourg is now this Council of Europe AI convention, which Israel is actually, kudos to Cedric and the Israeli team, were part of the negotiating team, so Israel can access this convention. And if I understand correctly, it is in the process of ratifying and joining the convention. So from the principal point of view, Israel is moving between these two frameworks to apply some of the by now recognized principles that apply to artificial intelligence, safety and security, transparency and explainability, accountability, equality, and dealing with unintended bias, and something which is very popular in technology policy 3.0, human-centered approach and using technology to further mankind in general. Technology is for us, and we should rule it. So from the legal technical point of view, the government policy approved, published at the end of last year, says we adhere to these ethical principles that the OECD published in the recommendation, but these are ethical principles, they're not yet legally binding. In order to make them part of the positive legal order, they need to be deployed by sector-specific regulators, which will now need to develop their application. Moving forward, I guess, if Israel accesses indeed the Strasbourg Convention, some of these things will need to have some legal force. So this is the external type of framework. And Israel is not unique in this type of approach, unlike the EU that has legislated already a complete law regulating AI, unlike Canada, which is proposing a framework law for AI, unlike Brazil. Israel is more the UK type approach of having a soft regulatory approach that coordinates within government and developing knowledge bottom up. And I think it's a unique approach focusing, maybe like Singapore, on a bottom-up governance approach where the government can play a role as a convener of civil society industry and as an interface between the more high-level principles and what happens in the market, but it's doing so in a very, let's say, soft approach of collaboration. I'm looking forward to seeing the regulatory measures coming out of the government, such as sandboxes, experimental regulation. And I think this is a place where maybe Israel can give an example of innovative regulation. I hope that gives us sort of the picture where we are.
One argument that we have made in the US is that it's very hard to do AI law if you don't have underlying data protection law. Right? Some issues are perhaps copyright, IP, adjacent, but some significant collection of the issues. Can you scrape all the data? Can you delete data? And so our argument is the US really needs to, successfully pass a data protection law and then build on it. Obviously, the Europeans might have been more strategic, or maybe this was the only political path, if they took GDPR, which already regulates automated decisions very significantly. Our team did during the GDPR negotiation process, we saw the AI discussions, forgetting that there's actually case law and decisions where automated decisions have been ordered to treat data one way or another. And we said, this is your current law, now add or change or so on and so forth. Don't ignore it and just go another, separate path. So Israel obviously is slowly making slow progress, adding layers of amendments and so forth to a more robust, more modern data protection law. But how do you see, is it going to be necessary to have an updated, first-class data protection law to end up having an AI law, or maybe we go the European path and have two things which we'll debate whether or not it's fitting together for a very long time.
So very, very briefly, my personal opinion is that data protection law is not geared up to all of the challenges of modern social uses of technology. And in this sense, the AI Act has a more comprehensive regulatory risk-based approach about impact, etc. And I hope that the Israeli legislator and policymakers take from the GDPR the principles, and we've seen sort of an experiment, I think, in something that Nir led with these adequacy regulations. They don't take all of the 88 pages of the GDPR. They have 5, 6 principles, which are the interfaces. So I hope that the Israeli regulator and legislator doesn't copy the GDPR as is, because the GDPR, as some of us know, is also an economic law designing relationships within Europe, and it's aimed for relationships with the US. So a lot of the content there, while GDPR is not really data protection. I I don't see at this point the Israeli legislation developing AI legislation, but I do hope that the champions of the Israeli data protection law make sure that it is AI ready.
And let me remind everybody that although we talk a lot about the EU AI Act, the first comprehensive AI law that will actually go into effect before the EU AI Act is the Colorado AI regulation. And while it's just one state, the drafter of the Colorado AI regulation worked with a group of 60 or 70 other state legislators. We played a big role in helping facilitate and coordinate that group just so they could communicate well amongst each other. Connecticut passed a very close version of this law. In the end, the governor got too nervous that maybe it's too strict and it didn't pass, but the sponsor is bringing it back. And there are maybe a dozen other states that are working on versions. They'll make their adjustments, but it's the same general framing. And so we are likely to have on the US side a reasonably comprehensive, once it's covering multiple states, it's of course, in general national law already, with a different model, maybe even stronger in some ways, because the EU AI Act, if you're high risk, obviously there's many restrictions. If you're not high risk, it's a very different mix. So this is a little bit of a different framing, but hopefully also something that can be something worth looking at as a terms of reference, given the importance of the U.S. and the global market. Okay, Nir, we already mentioned the state of privacy law and the developments in privacy law, and we understand, of course, that the Privacy Authority, just like the FTC and other authorities, have been looking at what their current jurisdiction and guidance is given current law. And what can you share with us about the view from the Privacy Protection Authority?
Well, following the things you said at the beginning of this panel, we are not threatened. The PPA, we are not threatened by the AI era, and following also the US experience you have mentioned. Although the challenges and risks involved in the development and deployment of AI are not limited to privacy, I think there is no doubt that the data protection regulation is to a great extent the foundation of any additional layer of regulation of an AI, and it is a layer, I believe so. And many of the AI-related privacy problems are very often not new, most of them not new. And as Professor Solov put it, AI is not an unexpected evil for privacy. It's just the future that has long been predicted. These are very well-put words, but for us, this is the routine, the everyday experience. And I think indeed most of these challenges have been addressed by data protection regulators like us in the PPA on a regular basis, long before they were branded as AI related. Therefore, I think at least in Israel, the Israeli DPA, the Privacy Protection Authority, I think shall remain a crucial element in any regulation of personal data related AI system, and this is even if an AI dedicated regulator is established in Israel in the future, which is not, as Amit mentioned before, this is not the approach the government has chose. It is important to remind that the Israeli data protection law has a very wide scope. Actually, it's binding all of the personal data processings, both in private and public sectors, according to the PPL, to the current version of PPL. It may change in a few weeks within the deliberations of Amendment 14 in the Knesset. But meanwhile, any substantial personal database is required to register with us prior to processing, and we are authorized to deny the registration request if the database may be used for illegal activities, or whether the data contained, accumulated, or collected violates the PPL, the Privacy Protection Law, or any other law to that extent. Well, as I said, it is probably in a very short time in relation to private sector database, the registration requirement is to be dropped. But the prior registration is still going to be required from public sector controllers and data brokers. And of course, the substantial norms will keep on binding all sectors of society. Conflicts between us and other regulators, be it AI dedicated or sectorial, they do occur. I mean, they occur all the time. Even before the brand AI was introduced to the Middle East, as some say, but the Israeli system has mechanisms to reconcile these conflicts without compromising too much the professional independence of each of the regulators in disagreement. I want, well, to be brief, if we compare the Israeli law, the PPL, on its current version, if you compare it to the GDPR and other like-minded data protection regimes, it doesn't include all of the general requirements and principles which are particularly relevant to address the AI challenges. Speaking of accountability, it doesn't have a general explicit obligation to conduct a data protection impact assessment. It doesn't have yet obligation to designate a DPO, although in Amendment 14, and this is news for some of the participants here who do not follow the long and interesting deliberations in the Knesset. The Knesset is about to introduce this obligation in the law, in the Israeli law, in scenarios and circumstances which are quite similar to the GDPR. Well, the Israeli law, it lacks some other principles that are of extremely relevance to AI, such as automated decisions and accuracy. So as I said, some of these principles will probably be introduced very shortly into the Israeli law book. We are going to cope or deal in the next phase of the reform of the Israeli data protection law, Amendment 15, as many of you probably know. And some of these principles are already binding in Israel concerning data transfer from the EEA. Amit mentioned those EEA data import regulations, which prescribe, for example, the need of an accuracy mechanism, and also for data minimization mechanism, and other principles which should be applied to data transferred from the EEA, and as of January 2025, they will have to be applied also to Israeli data subjects who is processed together with European data. This is a requirement set forth by the committee, the Constitution Committee in the Knesset. So there is a gap, but it is narrowing. Well, these very days we are indeed finalizing a draft guideline aimed to present our interpretation to the provisions of the Privacy Protection Law, which are of particular relevance to the AI-related data processing. Naturally, it will be shaped and limited by the limits and the boundary of the existing law. I will shortly just describe what it will address. We are going to address the need to point legal basis for every phase of the life cycle, both training and the processing, the use itself. Proportionality, we are going to stress, we are going to describe how proportionality should be put in place concerning AI systems, efficiency, statistical accuracy. We are going to deal with some aspect of informed consent and transparency, such as the way risks should be disclosed to the data subject, both privacy and other risks. The need to, data subjects should be aware they are interacting with a machine and not a bot. We are going to probably deal with the needs of and the form and the condition of consenting to scraping. Accountability, we are going to stress the overwhelming importance of accountability in AI-related processing, especially the data protection impact assessment, but only the importance and the way the DPO should, in the organization, should be involved. We are going to deal with accuracy, both the existing personal right to rectify in Article 14 and also the general accuracy mechanism, who is already, as I mentioned, is part of this EEA regulation, but also we believe should be part of data processing in organizations who are bound by proportionality, like public sectors, etc. And just briefly, we are also going to address some data security aspect, including the need to take adequate measures to prevent illegal scraping. Just to finish, I would like to mention another guideline. Since we are hosted in the Cyber Week, it's another upcoming guideline of us, which is worthwhile mentioning. It is on the subject of the role of the board of directors in carrying out the corporate obligations under the privacy security regulations. This guideline prescribes the general oversight duty of the board in matters of cyber security and data protection, and it also further the further involvement required from the board in certain specific duties imposed by the security regulations. I think I'll stop here.
When I first started meeting with companies that were working on LLMs, I said, well, obviously you won't roll this out in Europe, because how you can collect unlimited data, including personal data, online for a general unknown future purpose without an ability clearly to delete and with a clear reality of generating inaccurate data, I said, it sounds very exciting, but I don't understand how the European data protection regulators, who we see them bringing enforcements against ad tech and this and that, where they're more and more narrow about consent, more and more specific about proportionality and data minimization. And they said, oh, well, that's why we're not yet rolling it out. This was some of the bigger global tech companies. And then, of course, OpenAI rolled it out. And we saw the Italian data protection regulator immediately say, wait a second, this doesn't comply with data protection law. And I don't think they expected the global noise that it created, where they were attacked and ridiculed and mocked. Italy is going to fall out of the world economy. How is it possible that this thing that the business community and the researchers and the governments are looking as being strategic leaders and competing, and you said it's against the law, hold on, stop, right? Stop in Italy. And okay, a few weeks went by, and they said, okay, just have a click that kids, you guarantee you're not a kid, please. And they continued, and then the EDPB will give guidance. So I said, okay, when the EDPB gives guidance, then the shoe is going to drop. And you all probably read, many of you perhaps at least, the EDPB guidance. And they're taking very hard issues like purpose limitation and saying, well, you should apply it, and okay, maybe there's some flexibility. You mentioned purpose limitation, and it seems like that's one of the very hard issues with some of these models where they have no goal other than building a thing that knows language and can then be used to do thousands of different things. So do you see a very big tension with purpose limitation and the core of what we're talking about when we talk about generative AI?
Well, of course, there is a conflict, but from the Israeli legal system point of view, we have only, as you probably know, we have a very limited list of bases. So, you need a base. I'm speaking very generally, so don't catch me with the word, but and you need a base for processing only if the processing, the collection or the further processing infringes privacy. So in some cases, it's very complicated, but in some cases where you are scraping, let's say, from the internet, you will infringe privacy, and then you need either authorization by law, which is not the subject, or consent. And with consents, finding what is the purpose is easier. Of course, not in all of the circumstances, privacy will be infringed.
And we should note that the big generative AI models all maintain that they take steps to avoid collecting personal information other than sort of public figure, but if there's a list of names or like a database or so forth, they've taken steps to exclude it, and that they take steps to try to exclude this from their data sets. Obviously, the fact that it then spits out personal information, and there have been some attacks that claim, hey, look, we're showing, but they maintain that there is such an effort. And again, in the EDPB opinion, it seemed to recognize that if you're trying to do this, that maybe, is a way to say that you don't have personal information. I've had some discussions for a long time with some of the big models saying, okay, does the model contain personal information? They said, no, it's a model, it's not a database. I said, but it puts out personal information. But they said, well, no, it doesn't contain it. I get that it has different little nodes and probabilities and statistics, but maybe that legally means that it holds personal information, because it makes a big legal consequence, I think, if it's just a machine that generates stories and makes up, jokes about names, or does it actually hold personal information, again, if it's one of the big generative AI models. So I don't know yet that we have a conclusive answer to this.
Personally, it's my personal opinion, I could have found many reasons to treat the algorithm itself as data. Of course, this is not the official interpretation, and I don't think other regulators went that far, but it has the logic. It's a logic to treat it as data.
Before I go to Noah, a question for this audience. You saw we had some stickers with the shogoth, which sounds like a Hebrew word almost, right? But obviously it's not. Who knows what the shogoth is? Mazeh ha-shogoth? Anybody? Okay. So you'll learn at least one useful fact to show off to your engineering and technical people back at the companies or in research or so forth. When the machine learning engineers were working on these generative AI models at OpenAI and elsewhere, obviously it occasionally was doing some unexplainable, weird, odd things. And a lot of these tech engineers are big science fiction fans. And so there's a famous science fiction novel series where there's a shogoth monster. And they started using this as the unknown strange creature that is doing confusing, evil, bizarre, unexplainable things. So we have some stickers, beware the shogoth, because I think it's obviously applicable to all of us on the legal and policy side, but it was a very popular meme. So Google it if you have a chance, the shogoth, and at least your engineers will kind of know that you understand their little tech subculture. Noah, over to you.
So I came to here to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the industry. We are helping companies, especially in the high-risk industry, in the UK, US, Canada, to be able to implement AI in high-risk use cases, such as lending, mortgages, underwriting models, and so. So I just want to mention, as you asked Chen in the beginning about how you can risk assess in the new technology of the AI. So a lot of companies are now facing that the model risk management, the people that had the responsibility to do the risk assessments are not the one that can do it now because of the techniques that they did, the manual work. It's not relevant anymore to AI and machine learning models. And all those techniques and all these procedure of how to do it efficiently and at scale need to be changed dramatically. So it's not only the regulation, it's also there is a new ISO, the 42001, they're trying to do a order in this mess of how to do risk assessment and how to be able to afterwards to be comply with the different regulation, because we see that a lot of the companies, if it's banking and insurance companies, are having a lot of customers from different states in the US, or even all kind of customers from the European, so they want to be comply with everything. So in order to do so, they are going to the basics. The basics are, if it's the Fair Lending Act, for example, so they need to take actions about fairness, about the explainability, about to be transparent, to be robustness, all those measurements that they need to take in account in order to be able afterwards to go to the more sophisticated technology models. We see now also that there are starting to be fines in this world. If it's the Wells Fargo that had a big fine because of mortgages that discriminate a specific population and all kind of mistakes that the model do. If it's the chatbot that are selling cars in $1 or all kind of things. So we see that also the stakeholders now in those organizations are frightening from the risk that will cost them money. So it's not only the compliance officers that are frightening from the fines or the complying with regulation, but also the management level that is really frightening from the model to be drift, and then it won't be relevant anymore because it will give the wrong decisions. If they cannot explain to their own business units why the model made specific decisions. So we see it as the regulation tried to do something more in a structure that a lot of the time the stakeholders and the executive level in big organizations, in enterprises, are trying to really adopt those type of regulation and processes in order to minimize the risk and the financial risk for them in everyday working with those models.
There was mention earlier in the discussion about sector specific, and some have criticized some of the AI bills as being this very general thing about AI, when at the end of the day, how AI is used in health data might need some very specific, health-specific understanding of how it works and what the errors are. And in other areas, maybe there's a different kind of analysis. In lending, it's obviously one analysis. I wonder whether you or others, it certainly seems like the legislative effort in the US is excluding the areas that are already regulated for this matter. They're not re-regulating the banking laws or the fair credit laws, even though AI or some machine learning techniques perhaps are being used. But on the other hand, we see this other desire to do it very generally, mm-hmm. right? Is your experience in banking convincing us perhaps that this needs to be very sector specific? Many, many years ago, when I was a chief privacy officer at an ad tech company, the ads were optimized based on what was happening and what was clicking, and it did it by itself. It learned this was working, do more of that. And we didn't call it AI, we called it, big data or machine learning, and the issues that you had to worry about, which ad is selected or something for each user, is very, very different than who's getting a loan. So should we be looking much more narrowly at sector-specific issues than trying to regulate decisions in some big way? It's like regulating society with a way to talk about the risks to society, when different democracies, different countries are going to have a very different, security might have a very different analysis of how and where and why to keep out a bad actor than to prevent somebody accessing, critical welfare services, a loan, or or a piece of advertising.
So I'll just start by saying that if you are talking about specific industries, so if you are speaking about health and digital health, they are really more concerned about the FDA regulation than the AI regulation. And in the FDA regulation, there is a saying what they should do in new technology and how they need to be transparent and all those things. So because they need the approval of the FDA in the end, sometimes even it's more important that those specific regulations will be more strict or more relevant to AI than something general. Moreover, I have to say that also we see in the States that the CFPB, for example, is saying something specifically for the financial industry, or other specific regulators are speaking about those own industries. And I think that if you are taking care of a specific industry, the regulation is much more relevant to what you are doing and not something very wide. But if you are speaking about something that, as the European Union speak about the less, not the high risk ones, those industries can be more, general, because it's less affecting our daily lives and how we will use and, buy things and get all kind of services from a very important organizations, for example.
In your perspective, sector specific, I mean, I guess you're speaking in some sense from the protect infrastructure and security. Do you see the need to, is it one or the other? I mean, obviously we can have general and then go deeper for sector specific. Is this a conflict? Is it?
Well, I don't think it's a conflict. I agree that we can have general regulations, and then of course we need to look at sectors, whether we need to look at them because they work differently, they are sensitive because of different things. If we're talking about infrastructures, our concerns are a little bit different, and the restrictions also should be, I think, different when we talk about different sectors, that the risks are different. So if you have sectors that the security issues are pose a bigger threat there, then we need to focus on that. If we have sectors where the privacy issues are more important to us, then we need to be stricter on that area. So of course we need to look at it both in a general way, because you can't regulate one sector when we talk about AI. But yes, definitely there is a place for differentiation.
I think it was you, Amit, who said the words sector specific. So, but then I also heard your perspective that it might be that the Council of Europe, which of course you all know is not the European Council, the European regulator, but the Council of Europe, which includes a much broader range of global companies that can accede to these treaties. Do you see that as a sector-specific path, if that ends up being sort of the influence through that mechanism that Israel looks to?
No, because first of all, the Council of Europe protects democracy, rule of law, and fundamental rights. So technically, its scope is narrower in impact than, let's say, the OECD recommendation. So that's one thing. But regarding this, when is sector-specific, I think basically we need to look at like three types of parameters, and they're different. One is, do we have shared technological risks? So if we talk about machines that we train, some of our knowledge about what can go wrong when training machines, it's the same if you're training it based on a medical data set or training the car to see things. So some technical features are the same. And the impacts may be different, so that also creates different types of considerations. And finally, from a market point of view, sometimes it's better to regulate at source. If everyone is using LLMs, then we need to go to the developer of the model that everyone is using. And this is, again, one of the things I think is important to note, that as Omer Tene said, ChatGPT came out and took out all the air in the room. And actually, when I was consulting the Israeli government, there wasn't OpenAI. We were just like our colleagues in Brussels, we were thinking about AI as something a bit different, and then it came out and we needed to adjust ourselves. So I think one other consideration is, do we want to regulate the use of large language models in chatbots through the banking sector, or maybe should we go to the source? So if Microsoft has Copilot inside and everyone is now using it, should it be regulated through the use, or sometimes it should be more regulated at source? And we have been through this discussion in cybersecurity and privacy when we migrated to the cloud, right? Well, is it efficient to regulate the end user and not to think about the source? So sector specific.
Nir, I'm going to ask you a different question, and then we'll open to your questions here. I remember having a tour at some point at the Privacy Authority and being impressed at some of the technical forensic capability that I didn't think existed at many other regulators to investigate some of the criminal issues and technical data breach and fraud by actually running tools and scanning, and obviously the capacity was there in-house. The argument in terms of AI regulation is that anyone who's got some good skills in AI is today, earning huge amounts of money sucked into all the work that's being done, and the struggle to hire people with the technical experience to even keep up and do the enforcement. This is always the criticism when it comes to regulators, but it seems like some of the machine learning stuff to demonstrate the bias and to accept someone's explanation that there is bias, isn't bias. I've sort of struggled to, you have academics presenting, there's no way to eliminate bias. There's all these definitions of fairness, and it ends up being very, math very quickly. And do you see the Privacy Authority having the internal chops to, hire AI experts, or can you already do it with the current capacity?
We have good people. We obviously will need more resources, and actually some of these issues are deliberated in these very days in the Knesset. But we'll need to change, obviously, the type of employees and type of investigators, or the way you hire them. This is on the forensic or practical side, and I think we'll have also to change the way of the enforcement at all, because the paradigm of the right of privacy has changed. So we'll need the Israeli law is really focuses on cybersecurity, on data security, on confidentiality, whereas the challenges of the AI should lead us to different regulatory approaches, such as going to risk assessment or the accountability of the organizations themselves, and to limit the processing of the goal of the use, etc. But many changes will have to be done, and we have a good expertise within the PPA. We need more resources, absolutely, and more.
Let's go to the audience here. Questions, thoughts, disagreements, reactions from anybody in the room? Just raise your hand and we'll reach out to you. Yes, Jason.
Lots of questions. So we're existing right now in the shadow of the EU AI Act, and I was wondering if there's
All the Israeli lawyers are laughing.
but the Americans are laughing harder, just quietly. So I really do believe that you all might actually move on something quicker than we will.
Well, you cannot just copy foreign legislation. This is our main mission in the last years, legislation and reform. We always look and study very carefully the GDPR, the OECD principles, speaking of data protection. We follow very carefully the AI Act and other guidelines and other regulations, but what you call תנאי הארץ ותושביה, the circumstances, the legal system, the basic legal system, legal infrastructure, and the interest, the other interest and interests, and the risks, challenges of the Israeli society are different. So we always try to draft a regulation which is in harmony with the international. Always, this is the goal, but you'll always have to make some changes or many changes. It depends on the context.
Yeah. Amit, I think, if I'm right, you described in terms of, at least the future legislative strategy as no, Israel is not trying to invent the best AI law and sort of lead in that regard, but rather follow Council of Europe being guidance, OECD, see perhaps where the convergence is. There is no current, there are the slow pieces of the privacy amendments moving forward, but it appears that the official government strategy, after a lot of debate and reports and back and forth, is let's see where this goes and not be, the first to lock down what could be a significant commercial activity, despite perhaps some of the risks. So some debate about whether it's the right strategy, but it does seem to be the current view. Is that?
Yeah. The consensus, again, I'm not in the government, but I was a fly on the wall and sometimes a more active fly. I had the opportunity. So actually, the Israeli, if you talk about the Brussels effect, then there's the Tel Aviv effect. And the Tel Aviv effect is innovation, 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 innovation. And we'll talk about the ethical principles when we need to meet our consumer that wants to comply with these principles, basically. And at the same time, it needs to be said, some sector-specific regulators, our Ministry of Health is doing really amazing work in some areas. Of course, the Privacy Authority, the financial authorities are looking at specific risk scenarios that they want to deal with. But no one is here ready to legislate both something which is an omnibus comprehensive thing, and also when you go through the EU AI Act, it has also the regulatory mechanisms of risk assessment, very detailed, very lengthy, and these are things, as Jules alluded to, that maybe we'll have tool sets that will change the way we do risk management. So legislating this is also not really. So that's the long answer to what Jules just said.
Yeah, and in effect, obviously, lots of leading companies, even if they're serving the local market, are building primarily or even first the tools for European market, US market. And so there'll be some mix of, as there is today, frankly, in some of the privacy structure, people that are doing the same thing for CCPA, and then they're doing it to some degree, locally, even though maybe they could have some more, leeway because it's not fully mandated. Okay. Yes, final question.
Question for Bill.
I can say from my experience only that we see now that because of the EU, it will take a little bit for them to really need to be complied with. And they want to start building a more responsible mechanism. So they are taking what there is now, which is the 42001, and already the auditing firms are giving some guidance of, gap assessment and so on, like how they can comply with this ISO. So a lot of the big enterprises, when they are coming to the small vendors, they can tell them, instead of me be responsible to your own mistakes, you need to be comply with those. So we see that less the internal development of when a bank is having its own internal developer, there they want to be like the most, with the EU, or if it's Canada, there is OSFI or other regulators relevant to the vertical. But if they are buying from a third-party vendor, what is more common for them to ask is the ISO, for example.
We will take a short break to have a snack and to chat with our panelists, and then we will be joined by the Deputy Attorney General and leading experts. Rivki Dvash will lead our conversation. So please join me in thanking the panelists for their comments. And we'll see you back in this room in exactly 15 minutes.